V and Kaz, two ladies with 20 years of experience in personal development. These interesting discussions relate to everyday life and how to sync our thinking.
Thank you for viewing, liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support enables our channel to grow. Unfortunately, we did experience some technical challenges with this video, and it does freeze in the beginning, but it does get better later on, so please watch and enjoy.
So the other day I had this power failure. My electricity tripped, and I was at home alone. I had my phone with me, and I tend to use the torch on my cell phone quite frequently. So in total darkness, rushed to the DB board with my torch on my phone to try to see what the problem was and if I could fix it. And my torch was on, got to the board, looked at it for about a minute, and the power died on my phone. My battery was flat, so I had no torch, which was a serious problem because suddenly I was sitting in the dark. I had no torch. I have no other torch in the house. So in the dark with no torch, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the switches to try to determine the problem. Plus my phone was out and I couldn't phone anyone to come and assist me. I couldn't phone an electrician. I couldn't charge my phone because I had no electricity. So eventually I just went and sat outside in the dark and waited and thought, well, I either wait for daylight or whatever the case may be. But during that time, some thoughts came to mind, and I thought, this is quite a good example of life, because we rely so much on power. We use power for so many things, and we don't think about how much the role of power plays in our own lives, power in the form of effort. And very often we start something. Initially we have all that power and that energy to begin something, but if the power isn't there to sustain it, the whole thing peters out and falls flat. And it was quite a good life lesson, I think, for me, just to sit there and give some thought to the experience that I'd had.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine it would. Well, at least you used the opportunity constructively, I suppose. Made the most of the situation. That's good to hear. But it makes me actually think. It makes me think of an example of cooking. For example, if I want to cook potatoes, and I take potatoes and I put them in the pot, and I put them onto the stove, and I turn the power off, so power on, sorry, so that they come up to the boil, and then I turn the power down, and I'm not going to cook my potatoes. And I've got the potatoes, I've got the pot, I've got the water, I've got the stove. I've turned the power on to get the heat up, to build it up so that I can bring them to the boil. But then I turn it down, and I haven't maintained that. And as much as I want my potatoes to cook, they're not going to cook because the power isn't there. And I think that very often happens in life, is we want to achieve some change in our lives. We want to affect a change, and we very often are good at starting it. So we'll get the tools and we'll have that initial power in the beginning to get going. But where we fall down as people is like your torch on your phone. We don't carry that power through.
Yes, yes.
And that's what causes us the problems in achieving the results that we want to achieve.
Absolutely. I think, and it comes down to comfort zones, because we want to be comfortable. Comfort for all of us means something different, but we want to be comfortable. We want to be comfortable in our relationships, in our lifestyle, in our bodies, in our quality of life. So we want comfort, and very often there's that little voice inside that tells us that we could be more comfortable in a certain area of our lives. But although we have this little message coming through that we could achieve a greater sense of comfort, we don't realize that we can't always go from comfort to comfort. So if I'm currently in a state of what I think is comfort, and sometimes we fool ourselves to think we are very comfortable at the moment, we don't take into consideration that we might need to go through some kind of discomfort in order to reach a higher state of comfort or a greater state of comfort. And the challenge of going through discomfort puts us off embarking on any change. So even though I know that I could be more comfortable, say, in how I manage my money or in a relationship or whatever the case may be, I could achieve a greater sense of comfort, but I'd have to go through the discomfort of changing certain things. And like you mentioned with the power, to have that sustainability, I'd have to put power into it continuously. Power is effort. You know, power we can look at in many different forms. So the effort of effecting that change over a period of time so that I go through the discomfort to eventually have that higher level of comfort. And it just becomes, it's almost like too much for me, and I just don't even get started. Sometimes we do get started and we think, well, gee, I could have a greater level of comfort. For example, physically, I'm going to embark on an exercise routine. And we get all excited and we use that initial power, and we go and we buy the new gym clothes and the exercise equipment and everything. And there's that initial surge. As you said, we switch the power on the stove to cook the potatoes. And if we actually think of ourselves as a bag of potatoes, we get to the point where we are never going to cook because then the power just wanes. It like fizzles out, and the great start just fizzles into nothing. So if we do get started, I think that's such a good lesson, that the power needs to be there. There needs to be consistency with regard to that power, that implementation of focus, concentration, effort, whatever the case may be, in order to effect that change and get to the point of experiencing that greater level of comfort.
Yes, exactly. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is why. We have the knowledge, we know what we need to do, we know how to do it, we have the equipment. So why is it that we falter? Why is it that we don't use the power? Why do we turn that power down? And I think there are two reasons that we do that. I think the first reason is that the situation that we are in is so familiar to us, it becomes comfortable. And even if we're not happy with it, we know it so well, it's so familiar, it's so comfortable, it's what we know, that taking an action to create the change and continuing with that is actually more difficult than staying in the situation we are in. So we choose to stay in the situation we are in, even though we're not happy with it, rather than deal with the discomfort of moving forward. So, for example, if I wanted to renovate my kitchen, and I think, my kitchen's old and dated, and I'd love to renovate it. And I go out and I get a contractor to come and give me a plan, and I get the plans approved, and I know what I need to do. And then I think, but you know what? If I have my kitchen renovated, that means I have builders in my house, and I'm going to have to unpack all my cupboards, and it's going to be a mess and noise and days without a kitchen. And you know what? It's just, no, I'm not going to do it right now. So I choose to live with my old dated kitchen. Even though I have everything ready, I can have the new appliances, the new design, it's all there, it's just waiting. It's the same thing. I choose to live with the discomfort of the old kitchen rather than have the discomfort of the renovation. And that's very often what we do. The familiarity of what we know is so comforting to us. It's almost like security for us, that we hold on to it and we don't want to change. And then I think the other reason we don't want to change, and it applies to all of us, is that we learn patterns from people we know, from our role models. And when we've learned a pattern, a behavior, a thought pattern from somebody who is a role model to us, we value that and we attach emotion to it. And when we value something and we've attached emotion to it, it's very difficult to change it. Yes. So if I say something like, you know what, my grandmother and I, we have the same eating patterns. No, we have the same eating patterns. I've always been the same. And my grandmother was so special to me, and we were so close, and she played such a big role in my life. What I'm doing is I'm valuing that eating pattern. So even if I know that it's an unhealthy eating pattern and it needs to change and it's not doing the best for me, it's not great for me, what I'm saying is, because I value my grandmother, I value the eating pattern associated with her. And I can almost feel guilty that if I change it, then I'm saying I don't value her as much as I do. Yes. And what I need to realize is that it's not saying I don't value her. What I'm saying is the pattern that I learned from her isn't doing me any good and I need to change it. And I think that's a big shift that we need to be aware of, is where we value patterns that aren't working for us. And that's how we need to change them, because that's what holds us back often.
And I think also, as you say, as soon as you mention, for example, looking at what we've learned from a role model without question, because as humans, obviously none of us is perfect and we can always improve upon patterns of behavior, whatever the case may be. So we learn from each other. But when we become so reliant on that external influence, what it does sometimes as well is that we become reliant on it even to create change in our lives. So we may be in a discomfort zone where we've fooled ourselves to believe that we are in a comfortable space. That little voice is telling us it could be better. And we ignore it. We know that it's there, but we also feel very dependent upon others to come along and tell us how to fix it. So the fact that nobody is bringing it to my attention, nobody has come and said, well, you need to change this is how you can change it. This is what you need to do. This is the date you need to begin the change on, whatever. We just don't get started. We just settle back into that state of comfort, even though it's discomfort, because we could improve upon it. And, also I think the thought of going through the discomfort, as you say, is so important, because I think of the example of exercising, where let's say I begin to run. I start running, but I haven't been running for a while and I'm not quite fit. I'm not where I should be. But when I start running, I'm going to have a lot of discomfort. I know that by getting into the running, I'm going to feel healthier, fitter, whatever the case may be. I'm going to take myself to a higher level of comfort. Eventually, that's my intention. But in order to get there, I've got to go through the discomfort of feeling really, really bad when I start running. And everything's going to hurt and the breathing's not going to be great. And, but with exercise, we know that you've got to persevere through that difficult place until you get to that sweet spot. And when you're in the sweet spot, even you're training, and it's not easy because you're still challenging your body, but you are more comfortable than you were initially. Very often what we do is we don't persevere, so we don't get to that sweet spot, because changing a pattern, changing behavior, changing an eating pattern, or how we interact with people, whatever the case may be, means that we are going to go through a difficult stage, because we're going to leave, as you said, the familiar behind. And what happens sometimes is we get excited, we, prepare for it, as we've said, we get all the tools together and, that spark of energy, and then it's as though the battery dies because we think this is just too much. And we don't see ourselves through that difficult period and get to the point where it becomes easier, because eventually what happens is that new pattern becomes our norm, and we are very comfortable then in that new pattern. But we've got to go through the discomfort before we can get to being comfortable in the new pattern. And once we're comfortable in that new pattern, that comfort, that level of comfort, will take us to a greater level of comfort. But it means going through the discomfort initially, which we often very, very much avoid.
We do. We do. It's almost as though we put more importance on the current situation than what we actually want to achieve. And it doesn't always make logical sense to us, because we know what we want to achieve would be better, but somewhere something is holding us back. Like I say, the familiarity or the role model or the emotion. It's almost, if you think about, if you have a couch, you have a really comfortable couch and you've got your favorite position on that couch, and that's where you always sit because it's your sweet spot, as you say. And one day you happen to drop pins on the couch and you pick them up, but you miss one, you don't realize. And now every time you sit on the couch, you get a prick in that there's something pricks your leg, and it's not terrible. It's not like it's creating this huge hole in your leg, but it's uncomfortable. And what we do then is we sort of shift our positions and we start sitting in a different way. And the pin is there. We're not taking the pin away. But what we do is we sit in a way that maybe strains us. But we say, but this is my spot. This is where I sit, and I will keep sitting here. And even if it's uncomfortable and I end up getting a stiff neck or a sore back or something because I have to sit in some funny position, that's what I do. Instead of actually stopping and taking the time out and the discomfort of getting up and taking the cover off the cushion and saying, where is this pin? And taking the pin out and putting it away and putting the cover on, and then checking the couch when I sit down. What I do is I would rather sit in some awkward position. And I think that just that discomfort of sorting the problem out, and then I can get back to enjoying my couch and sitting in the position that I enjoy and really having a wonderful experience, where now I'm so uncomfortable that I'd rather choose that than enjoying my couch.
Indeed. So it's like life is that comfortable couch, but we decide on the level of discomfort that we're prepared to cope with. And if we feel that it's a minimum level of discomfort, we say, oh, I can just bear it. I can live with this. And the effort of changing it would be too much. So we adjust ourselves to cope with that level of discomfort, and we just continue. And we tell ourselves then that that is our comfort zone. I think it's got so much to do as well with intention, you know, when we look at the intention, because our level of comfort, what we want to achieve in life, and we see that as comfort, more comfort, whether it's having finances that are managed more effectively so that we can have a better quality of life, or travel, or whatever the case may be. When we have intentions to achieve certain goals, those are related to our levels of comfort. And the way we conduct ourselves from day to day, and just brings to mind a story, a lady I was working with at a company a few years ago. And when we were in a workshop, it was actually a group intervention, and she mentioned that one of her intentions in life, she was a middle-aged lady, was to be seen as, she had this sort of image of herself, and she said, I want to be seen as kind and considerate, and a good listener and helpful. And she had this list, but according to everybody she worked with, this is not the behavior she displayed. You know, she might have been a little considerate once a week, but she was generally short-tempered, always busy, not a very good listener. So she wasn't displaying generally on a day-to-day basis the behavior that she wanted to be recognized for. And she was fooling herself into believing that she should be recognized for this positive behavior because she was implementing it very, very seldom. And I think this is a good lesson for all of us, because the only way that she could change that and have the recognition for that personality or that image would be to change her daily behavior. And that's, as you said, it's that consistent heat to cook the potatoes. So I think we need to keep asking ourselves, you know, see ourselves as a pot of potatoes and say, well, are we maintaining that level of power in order to effect the change that we want to experience? And whether that change is related to ourselves and our experience directly, or the people we interact with. So if I want to see a change in my relationship, for example, with any particular person, I would need to implement certain behavior in order to see that change. And it would have to be sustainable. It would have to be something that I do consistently. I can't say, well, last month I sat and listened to you for an hour, so I am actually a good listener, when other times I never do that, you know. So there's so much to discuss on this point, but I think it's so valid, that whole idea of really being persistent with what we want to achieve in life.
Like you say, it needs to become a new habit. And that applies even with companies. I was running a management workshop a while ago, and part of what we were doing was looking at the company's image, what the image of the company is that they want to project to the public, to their clients. And we listed everything, and the managers were giving me examples. And then we said, okay, so is this what you portray internally? Is this carried internally? Is this the way you behave? And they all sat very quietly for a while, and they said, no, this isn't, you know, the positive image that we want to project to our clients isn't actually the way we operate on a day-to-day basis. Yes. And we were saying, but how can you expect to project that image if that's not the way that you're behaving? That's and right. With things like conflict management and customer service, etc., it's all good and well to have it up on the wall in a frame in your lobby for people to come and read, but right. You need to actually be living it. for it to become the reality.
Yes.
It needs to be a habit. And
Yes.
that's how we create the resolve. Knowing it isn't enough. Knowing what you want to project, knowing the change that you want to have isn't enough. We actually have to put the effort in to create it and maintain it.
That's right. And I think this applies as well to us as individuals. So that's a really, really good point that you've made. We need to internalize it in order to project it out there and to experience it. So if within that company they have the goal to project themselves as helpful and considerate and going the extra mile, let's say, for their customers, if they aren't living that internally within the organization, it's ludicrous to expect that to be projected out to their surroundings. And as individuals, it's the same. We say, I want to go up to the shops and I want people to be kind and considerate on the road. But I might be the most short-tempered driver, swearing and showing route signs to everybody and questioning why people are not kind and considerate on the road. But if I'm not living it internally, how do I expect to project it and experience it in my interactions with others?
Exactly.
It's really about creating a lifestyle. I think when we look at effecting change in our lives and the power, it always comes down to power, our internal power as human beings. We have so much of it, we don't utilize a lot of it most of the time. We have a battery that is actually always on. We don't run the risk of our battery going flat. We just have to make sure that we use that power. And we can use that power to maintain consistency and to create patterns that work for us. I think that is really, really important. And it's a case of living it. It's like probably an example would be a crash diet versus a healthy living plan or a healthy lifestyle. Which is the more sustainable, which is going to give the more effective long-term effect and create a sense of ultimate comfort in the long run. So lots more to chat about on that, Cara. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very, very interesting.
Click like, share, and subscribe to grow this valuable channel.